Thank you very much to the Hungarian Society for Pharmacology for inviting me to talk about the dark side of pharmacology. So, what I would like to do in my presentation is to achieve 4 aims. I would like to analyze how even short-term political and religious persecution of scientists inflicts long-term damage to the scientific community. Then I would like to show which factors are important for persecuted scientists to remain successful. I would like to show how the pharmacological journals mirror the history. And I also would like to show how important it is to preserve academic freedom. So I would like to briefly introduce Naunin-Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology. Naunin-Schmiedeberg Archives of Pharmacology was founded in 1873 by the pharmacologist Schmiedeberg, by the internal medicine professor Naunin and the pathologist Klebs, and is the oldest existing pharmacological journal. It is edited for the German Pharmacological Society by Springer Nature, and I have been serving as the editor-in-chief of the journal since 2016. The journal covers actually all fields of pharmacology, is an online publication with a hybrid publication model, and as very few of you may know, the journal actually struggled to survive. Between 2005 and 2007, we had less than 200 submissions per year, and I will explain you why. But the journal has recovered, so last year we had close to 4,000 submissions, and this year we are predicted to have more than 4,000 submissions. So what we did in the project, which is a doctoral thesis project of a medical student, Mirjam Miespargel, is that we analyzed various historic sources. So we looked at the book Verfolgte deutschsprachige Pharmakologen, edited by Löffelholz and Trendielenburg. This is in German language. We also analyzed the history book of German pharmacology by Athenius Philippou, and then searched the archives of Naunin-Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology, the Journal of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, and the British Journal of Pharmacology, and looked on the topics that were covered by these pharmacologists using the textbook Basic Knowledge of Pharmacology. So in the following slides you see a list of the names of 71 known persecuted pharmacologists. Listed alphabetically. This has already actually been published, so this is just a brief review. You see the names, the year of birth, the year of death, gender, what they studied, the destiny, the immigration year, and the year, the country of immigration. And this is a list of very eminent pharmacologists. The older ones may know some of the names, but the younger may not know the names. So one famous pharmacologist is actually Blaschko. He immigrated to the United Kingdom. Edith Bülbring is another famous pharmacologist. Philipp Ellinger will play a role later in the presentation. Then if we go further, in the German Democratic Republic, Robert Havemann was a leading pharmacologist and also a political dissident, so he was always between the chairs, so to speak. I'm going to also talk a little bit about Otto Kreyer. Hans Kosterlitz, very famous pharmacologist working on the opioid system in the United Kingdom. And Otto Löwy is also a very prominent example of a persecuted pharmacologist. Close by here in Graz in Austria, he was a chair of the pharmacology department. He won the Nobel Prize together with Sir Henry Dale for the concept of neurotransmitters, but nonetheless he was expelled from his post. So another prominent persecuted pharmacologist, actually with ties to Hungary, is Heinz Otto Schild. Everybody knows the Schild plots, so this comes from Heinz Otto Schild. And I'm also going to mention in a little bit more detail Marthe Vogt. She also emigrated to the United Kingdom, and Albert Wollenberger is kind of interesting person because he immigrated to the United States, but because he was a communist during the McCarthy era, he re-immigrated to the German Democratic Republic. So what was the destiny of the persecuted pharmacologists? So 90% of them managed to immigrate to other countries. only 10% of the persecuted pharmacologists came back to Germany after the Second World War. 10% of the pharmacologists somehow remained in Germany under very obscure conditions. 4% committed suicide and 3% were murdered in concentration camps. So compared to the overall Jewish population, this is very low because this was a very privileged population, evidently. So when we look, when they emigrated from Germany, you see two peaks. The first peak was in 1993, so just a month after Hitler took over power in Germany, he issued a law that all Jewish professors from universities be removed. And this resulted in an immediate emigration wave from Germany. And there was a second immigration wave in 1938 when there was a pogroms against the Jewish population, and even everybody kind of recognized, so this is probably going to persist and not just a transient development. The destiny countries were mostly the United States, so this was really dominant with 43%, and second was Great Britain with 28%, and other European countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands also played a role. At that time, Palestine and Israel didn't yet exist, didn't really play a big role. When we look on the contribution of the persecuted pharmacologists to the publications in Naunin Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology, it is very evident that in particular in the 1920s, this group of pharmacologists contributed to up to 26% of the annual publications in the journal. So this was a very substantial contribution. And after 1933, this declined substantially. And after the Second World War, there was a little bit of a comeback, but not comparable to the pre-war area. And when we analyze the research topics of the persecuted pharmacologists, what they contributed to Naunin Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology, you can see here on this wheel, and you see lots of colors. And the different colors really reflect the many topics that were covered by these individuals. So there were many topics. Evidently, there were some favorite topics like cholinergic and adrenergic systems, but there were many other topics. And now if you compare this wheel to the topics that were covered by Naunin Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology after the war, in the period between 1974 and 1974, it becomes evident that there was a shift in topics. So the journal has become a specialized neurotransmitter journal, adrenergic system, dopaminergic system, serotonergic system. And the journal largely depended on major contributors such as Manfred Goethert, Arthenius Philippou, and Klaus Starker. But when a journal is focused on just few topics, it is very vulnerable to future developments. So essentially, there was nothing else than neurotransmitters. And so the journal was not prepared for thematic shifts in pharmacology, as we have seen now by Maria. Immunopharmacology is a hot topic, but this was never covered in the journal. And so the question is, where did the pharmacologists then publish when they left Germany? And one target journal was the JPAD. So before 1933, very few publications were in the JPAD, but after 1993, this increased substantially, and in the 40s, up to 8% of all the papers from the United States in pharmacology came from German persecuted pharmacologists. And this is particularly interesting, I guess, for Peter here. Also, the British Journal of Pharmacology greatly benefited from persecuted German pharmacologists. So the BJP was founded after the war in 1946. And during the initial phase of the journal, up to 20% of the papers were from persecuted German pharmacologists, and this legacy continued until the 1980s. So they found a new home. And so here the three journals are put together. So it is very clear until 1933, Naunin Schmiedeberg Archives of Pharmacology was, I can say, the leading pharmacological journal globally. and that's changed dramatically after the Second World War. JPET became more important and the British Journal of Pharmacology. So a dramatic shift as a result of persecution. And I would like to just highlight two individuals to show how they are published individually. And one is Otto Kreyer. I already introduced him. So this is actually the Otto Kreyer House at the University of Freiburg, which now hosts the Institute of Pharmacology, and this is Otto Kreyer as an older gentleman. So he was born in 1989 and died 1982 in Tucson, Arizona. He worked in the pharmacology department in Berlin since 1927, and he became extraordinary professor in 1932. And because he was so well established, he received the offer to become chairman of the pharmacology in Düsseldorf, and the post in Düsseldorf became vacant because Philipp Ellinger, who was Jewish, had to leave. But Kreyer said, no way that I'm going to accept this position because Philipp Ellinger is a top pharmacologist, so I do not deserve this position. But this evidently caused problems for him, so he had to leave Berlin. He was dismissed and immigrated to England, became a visiting professor in Beirut, and then he made a stellar career. He became the first chairman of the pharmacology department at Harvard Medical School. So he was in his 30s, so he was a relatively young age and could adapt to the situation. Later, he was honored by the German Pharmacological Society by the Schmiedeberg Award, and since 1985, ASPET has the Otto Kreyer Award to honor pharmacologists who serve as role models for scientific integrity. The other, and so this shows the publication behavior of Otto Kreyer. So he published in Schmiedeberg Archives of Pharmacology. Here, this shows the persecution, and what is very typical for persecuted pharmacologists that after the persecution there was a publication gap because they had to readapt to the new situation. And this gap was then filled by publications by Otto Kreyer in JPET. Evidently he was in the United States, so he published in the American Journal, and he had few publications in BGP, and he was invited to contribute to Schmiedeberg Archives of Pharmacology, but he never came back to this intensity. And the other individual I would like to highlight here is a very remarkable female scientist, Marthe Vogt. She was born in 1903 in Berlin. She studied chemistry and medicine, then did a postdoc in pharmacology, and already at the age of 28, she became director of the Department of Chemistry at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin-Buch. She came actually from a scientist family, so she had the science in her gene and probably got it already in kindergarten. And she was actually politically also dissident and didn't agree with the policies of the Nazi regime. Immigrated to the UK. She had a fellowship, a Rockefeller fellowship, and then did a stellar career together, first with Sir Henry Dale. Then she moved on to Cambridge, was at the Pharmacological Laboratory of the Pharmaceutical Society in London, then in Edinburgh, and finally at the Institute of Animal Physiology in Birmingham. She was also honored with the Schmiedeberg Medal of the DGPT, but interestingly, only many, many years after the Second World War. And in 2014, she was elected member of the Hall of Fame of the British Pharmacological Society. And her publication behavior is kind of similar to that of Otto Kreyer. So she started to publish in Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology. Here is a persecution. Then she had a long publication gap, and then she substantially contributed to the rise of the British Pharmacological Society, British Pharmacological Journal. So the take-home message of my presentations are that short-term attacks on science can have, as I showed, even decade-long lasting detrimental consequences for a country and a scientific journal. And the consequences of these attacks on science are extremely difficult to revert. It is very clear that the persecution really harmed the development of Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology, but on the other hand, scientists go to other places and boosted the British Journal of Pharmacology and JPET. And the loss of persecuted pharmacologists as authors reduced the thematic diversity and scientific relevance of Naunin Schmiedeberg's Archives of Pharmacology for decades and made the journal very vulnerable. And the top persecuted pharmacologists that I presented, they were very resilient and remained productive because they had this willingness to succeed, and they were in a relatively young age. And what was also very important for their success is that there were scientific support programs. At that time, the UK had wonderful support programs for refugees from Germany, and personal networks played a role in both the UK and the United States. So this shows some of the successful examples of persecuted pharmacologists. And I'm done, and I'm happy to take questions.